Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We got a great friend of the show, Chuck Rocha, on. He sent out a pretty provocative tweet about how the RNC might be landing with Latino voters.
Right.
So we want to get some more details there. We've also got the panel in the House to weigh in on all the events of the week. And we want to start with Donald Trump's big speech last night at the RNC.
Yes, it was a long speech. Some might say so even long. A little bit too long. Went for almost, I think it was over an hour.
It's just never necessary.
No, it really
Either Bill Clinton or Donald Trump.
I think all political speeches don't need to be more than like 25 minutes.
Agreed.
Like I was reading some history recently, and it was like a 4-hour speech. I was like, good Lord. I was like, what are these people doing? Anyway.
There was less to do back in those days.
Yeah, that's true. Long speeches aside, basically the speech, as we predicted, mixed bag. Just like his administration. Some pro-worker messaging, also some very annoying RNC GOP establishment talking points. We'll start, as we have been here, the good and the bad. The first one was really Trump talking about Biden's record. It's the first time I've actually ever heard that, because the RNC doesn't really disagree with a lot of Biden's record.
True.
Only Trumpists kind of do. And that made it into the speech. So let's take a listen to that.
For 47 years, Joe Biden took the donations of blue-collar workers, gave them hugs and even kisses. And told them he felt their pain. And then he flew back to Washington and voted to ship our jobs to China and many other distant lands. Joe Biden spent his entire career outsourcing their dreams and the dreams of American workers, offshoring their jobs, opening their borders, and sending their sons and daughters to fight in endless foreign wars.
Pretty effective.
I have to say that's the most effective attack I've heard on Biden from anyone. The entire RNC, this entire campaign, even the Democratic primary campaign. I mean, I wish that Bernie Sanders had said words like that.
Bernie could have given that exact same speech.
He could have. I mean, that imagery of giving blue collar workers hugs and pretending like you're their ally, taking their money and then shipping their jobs overseas. That is damning. And that's what I thought the argument against him would be, because, look, it wasn't hard to figure out. Hillary Clinton, you can run essentially the exact same playbook. And this is actually an innovation on that, because Biden really bills himself and has this worker, blue collar, middle class Joe persona. It is a very effective way to take that persona and turn it into actually a negative for him. That's the thing that they always say is go after your opponent's strengths. This is actually an effective way to do that.
I completely agree. And what it was in particular with that moment is it was bolstered more from the RNC as well. So last night, I thought that beyond Trump, and as usual, the workers themselves, are always the most experienced and the best ones at actually delivering a good speech.
Yeah.
Because it actually is about policy that impacts them. Was a woman, I think her name was Debbie Flood, and she ran a steel and manufacturing company in Wisconsin and was talking about how 50% of her orders in order to fill were obliterated by PNTR with China from the 1990s and onward. And this is also a small business person who works in the steel industry, which is pretty rare to actually find, so props to them. And she was like, look, Obama, Biden, they shipped my jobs. So nobody did anything for me. NAFTA, Joe Biden voted for PNTR with China. And finally, I've got more business coming my way because of the Trump tariffs. That's an extraordinarily effective message. Again, not something that you heard even the likes of at the DNC. So I think that was very important. And you bolster it with that. So those overall, I thought, were important. There was another moment, too, where Trump just kind of seemed to recall some of this 2016 energy, so to speak. Well, let's take a listen to that.
Biden's record is a shameful roll call of the most catastrophic betrayals and blunders in our lifetime. He has spent his entire career on the wrong side of history. Biden voted for the NAFTA disaster, the single worst trade deal ever enacted. He supported China's entry into the World Trade Organization, one of the greatest economic disasters of all time. After those Biden calamities, the United States lost 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs. We laid off workers in Michigan, Ohio, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and many other states. They didn't want to hear Biden's hollow words of empathy. They wanted their jobs back.
Also very effective messaging. Though one thing that I would say is, if we were in a non-pandemic time, it would land better. Because frankly,
no question.
I'm just looking at those images of the audience so close together without masks. And I have to say, it is really triggering to me.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people who have been living this, socially distanced life and wearing masks and doing all those things, like to see that is sort of shocking and kind of undermines, one of the core concerns. If you ask people what they care about this November, coronavirus is at or near the top of the list, and it's why President Trump is in trouble in terms of re-election. I mean, he did talk about, they tried to bolster the case throughout the convention. I would say they tried to basically rewrite history about the effectiveness of the coronavirus response. But this is a hard thing to gaslight people on because they're living it. They see it. They live it in every aspect of their life. So essentially what you have, the dynamic that has played out over the RNC, is Democrats are betting on coronavirus basically stays bad, remains the top concern, and the judgment is basically already in on Trump's handling of the virus. Republicans are betting on riots. They're betting on that the chaos in the street is what people are going to really care about, that suburbanites are going to come running back to them because they fear this violence and looting, and that the law and order message will finally break through. Up to this point, though, Trump is not getting good ratings on that issue as well. Now, look, what's happening in Kenosha right now obviously makes that message newly relevant. But Joe Biden, because he has been very clear about, condemning violence, because he's been very clear about, I do not support defunding the police, to my chagrin on that particular issue, it has made it harder to make this case that a Biden administration is going to mean lawlessness in the streets. Also, by the way, the lawlessness in the streets is happening under a Trump administration.
Well, and that's also the complicated part, which I do think was effective whenever Biden delivered his rebuttal, Biden and Kamala delivered their rebuttal, which we can talk about. I agree. I think if Trump loses this election, it will be because he didn't take coronavirus seriously in February. I think it's actually quite that simple. And if there's one, major criticism I have, it's that, which is, at the end of the day, they still are projecting the same message that they did when he was at the bottom of the polls in April, which is, this stuff is over. Let's not take it too seriously. Remember the whole lockdown debate and all of that? What that was fundamentally rooted in was we just want to wish the coronavirus away. And that's shameful. That was the administration's position, essentially, in April, in those dog days of polling and so much more for the country. That's the same message that they have right now. I think it lands a little bit better because there's so much more going on. People are focused on different things. Virus is down. However, we're in, it's August here, folks. Fall is coming soon. Pretty much everybody has predicted that we could have a resurgence in the fall, and particularly up into November. From what I'm hearing on these college campuses, it is a mess about the explosion of coronavirus, of people who, even if their colleges are online, a lot of kids still went to the towns anyway, partying,
getting together.
Look, I don't want to shame kids.
No, it's not about that.
Coronavirus is exploding amongst these younger generation who are super spreaders. They just are, because the virus is not very lethal towards them. So we very conceivably could see a massive spike in the next month or two.
And so if the issue ends up being that coronavirus is basically the determining factor in this election, all of the propaganda, all of the speakers who came out and tried to say that we got the mass production going and we tested so much, in Trump's own words in that speech, is really undercut by the visuals of having all these people sitting together with no masks on.
I agree.
And look, I got kind of annoyed at the cable news, they put on the chyrons, they weren't socially distanced, whatever. But a lot of times what lands with people more than the specific language is those visuals. And so I think that particular visual really undercuts the messaging that we are, in fact, taking this seriously now, and we've got this thing in hand, and we're going to continue to get this thing in hand. And then the other thing that I would say is there were pieces of the RNC that kind of worked, that we talked about, and then there were pieces that really didn't work. And overall, it was kind of a dog's breakfast. Like, you had contradictory things. You had, right, we're going to be the tough on crime and we're going to crack down on lawlessness in the streets. But maybe the number one policy issue they talked about was criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
So those things, don't necessarily fit together. Then you also have people like Rand Paul being like, he's getting us out of the wars. And then people like Tom Cotton being like, go, hawkishness, here we go, right?
Peace through strength.
Yeah, so you've got, okay, whatever. So you've got those conflicting messages. You've got, as we talked about before, you've got like the workers out there, but then they're like, and what we really need is more corporate tax cuts and more deregulation. So altogether, taking like the merits of the policy aside, in 2016, you knew what this campaign was about.
Yes, I
You could
agree.
say it in three lines. You knew exactly what it was. This time, you're kind of like, I guess it's about like Trump has a lot of black friends and criminal justice reform, but also we hate the protesters. It's just, I don't know that they really know what their reelection message is. And that comes through even just in this one speech. You had what we played, which was a very effective attack on Biden. The blue collar worker thing, very effective. And then you have another attack that is very not effective on Biden. Let's take a listen to Trump on Biden as a Trojan horse for socialism.
Biden is a Trojan horse for socialism. If Joe Biden doesn't have the strength to stand up to wild-eyed Marxists like Bernie Sanders and his fellow radicals, and there are many, we see them all the time, it's incredible actually, then how is he ever going to stand up for you? He's not.
And so, look, I would say the staging of the RNC was much better. The production value was much better than the DNC. But actually, the DNC messaging was very simple. And the Biden messaging has been very simple. You know what it is. It's
Trump is bad.
Return to normalcy.
Yeah.
Trump is bad. Return to normal. Trump, it was all over the place. And so, you had a lot of people doing the socialism sucks thing. Then they actually did, we're going to play for you later, a like socialist for Trump montage. And immediately out of that socialist for Trump montage, someone comes out and is like, we hate the squad.
Yeah,
So it's like,
it was very schizophrenic. It was
come
schizophrenic,
together.
right? It was all like, Trump is good, actually, he's good, and blue collar, but also we like tax cuts. You're right. It's all over the place. The only reason it might work, again, a very big might, is because it's very risky to go all in on Trump is bad. Because then if you can disprove it with Trump is actually okay,
He's
or
not as bad.
not even good, but okay.
He's not as bad as you're saying.
The man was elected with a 31% approval rating, okay? Like 2/3 of the people who voted for him were like, I don't like this guy. They just chose the lesser of two evils. Definitely could happen this time around too. So whenever you throw this like everything to everyone strategy, it's not coherent. If he had a better opponent, absolutely would be destroyed. But he doesn't have a better opponent, right? Mm-hmm. And so very much could work. And I think that's the main thing that we have to keep in mind, which is as schizophrenic and as crazy as all of this is, I think Trump, as you were saying, because he's already down so much, like 8 points in the national average, definitely could go have a bit of a point bump, as he did out of the RNC last time around. And overall, I just thought it was more effective.
Yeah, I think you're right. He certainly has more room to grow. Mm-hmm. So I think he could see, Biden got like a 1 or 2 point bump maybe out of the DNC.
The margin,
yeah, it was very, very marginal. I do think you could see a more noticeable bump for Trump coming out of this, exactly because of the dynamic that you laid out, which is that if you've been getting this messaging for years of like, this guy is a monster, and by the way, I mean, he took some actions that kind of back that up, as we talked about, like the crushing of the protesters in Lafayette Square Park. But then if you watch some of this and you see people talking, and many people really attesting in a very personal, emotional way about nice things that he did with them or for them or whatever, like it does make you feel like, okay, maybe he's not as bad as I've been led to believe. And ultimately, that's all he really needs to be sort of back in this ball game is, well, maybe he's not quite as bad as what they were saying. If that was the goal of the convention, I think they probably did pull that off. And I do think it'll be reflected in the polls a bit. But I also want to say, and I said this before, with 2020 being what it is and the like insane amount of news churn and chaotic events and unexpected events, it makes it feel like last week was last year. So do I think these conventions will ultimately be determinative electorally? No. And are they ever? I don't really know. But in this year in particular, I don't think they will be nearly as impactful or meaningful as they maybe have been in cycles past. it's just a really interesting window into how they are cohering their message, who they're speaking to, and what they think that the path, not only to victory in the fall is, but what the path, like the future of these two political
I totally agree. We've got 66 days till Election Day. 66 days ago, I barely remember. As far if I recall, 66 days ago, the virus was completely out of control. I think the Floyd protests were going on, so who the hell knows?
Yes, indeed. All right, more Rising for you after this.